A Great Argead Saga ALEXEIN, Alexander the Great. Volume 1, Telesias, The War Dance. By Macaulay. A new episode every single day. Episode 14:1, River of Shadows Part 1. The grand encampment of the Aegae, buried in the relentless black ink of midnight beside the glacial Haliacmon River, lay in a state of unnatural, stone-like submission. Inside the royal pavilion, the air was suffocating. Eurydice sat on a low, unadorned cedar stool, her spine unyielding, watching as Urano washed the highway grit from her lacerated feet, the raw penalty of her 40-mile barefoot penance. When the girl recounted how she had rejected Ptolemy's offer to ride in his closed litter, Eurydice gave a single, clinical nod. Good. Let the Aloros beast see his marriage bed has not made you his puppet. You walk in the dirt tomorrow because the dirt remembers who belongs to it. The linen flap parted in absolute silence. Philip slipped inside, his tunic marked by the coarse gray salt of the plains, followed closely by Perdiccas. As the family converged, Eurydice rose to anchor them. Together, the four of them, mother, king, prince, and princess, formed a tight, desperate circle. In that shivering patch of canvas, the entire survival of the Argead line was reduced to a few ragged breaths in the dark. They aren't sleeping, Philip noted coldly, his slate-gray pupils tracking the distant command pavilions. Ptolemy is measuring the treasury, not calculating the rituals. Perdiccas swallowed hard, a volatile panic breaking his voice. He looked at my throat like a butcher measuring a yearling lamb mother. If the vanguard defaults to his guards, he will clear this tent before the winter rains. And the Greeks? Urano asked. Ptolemy swore Pelopidas was still pinned in the south. Ptolemy sees only paper, Philip replied, pointing a finger through a canvas slit toward 3 cold hearths near the reeds. Those are the proskopoi, the elite scouts of Thebes. While our soldiers are dead drunk, they are calculating the geometry of the kingdom they are about to take. Then the fire spread. High above the valley of the Aegae, the jagged black spine of the mountain range erupted. One by one, 1,000-foot beacons of dried pine and animal fat ignited across the peaks, tearing through the obsidian sky like a row of fresh, bleeding gashes. It was a masterclass in psychological encirclement by the Illyrian king, Bartolus. To the men on the plain below, it appeared as though the earth itself had grown teeth, a wall of barbarian fire framing the lowlands like a burning noose. The collapse came not with a shout, but with a roar. A volley of fire-tipped arrows arched from the high cliffs, raining down like falling stars onto the dry pine needles of the gorge. In seconds, the floor of the pass was a carpet aflame. The horses, maddened by the smell of smoke and the searing heat, reared in terror, throwing their riders. The illusion of the solemn Aegae disintegrated into absolute, primal chaos. Lord Dirtis was the first to react. His iron-gray stallion leaped over a burning cart, hooves scrabbling for purchase on the steep rocky slope of the northern hillside. Up, he roared, his voice cutting through the shrieking of men and the hiss of fire. The low ground is a furnace. To the high ground, Menas of Larissa did not hesitate. He grabbed the bridle of Helena's mount, yanking the animal hard to the left, away from the carnage of the central column. He knew the terrain. He knew the royal encampment had been established in the lee of the higher ridges shielded by the slope. Stay low, he barked over the roar of the fire. Together, they surged toward the steep, scrub-covered incline, not to flee into the wilderness, but to reach the designated safety of the royal enclave. Philena's hood fell back, her face a pale mask of shock, but she mirrored her father's desperate agility, urging her horse to climb as arrows hissed into the dirt behind them. As they crested the rise, the smoke parted, revealing the white canvas of the royal quarters. Menas rode straight for the central structure, where the standards of the Argead house still flew. They slid their mounts to a halt before the guards, who were already struggling to collapse the lines. Menas threw himself from his horse, pulling Philena down with him, and shoved through the canvas flap of Queen Eurydice's tent. Inside, the transition from the hellish roar of the ambush to the heavy, incense-laden silence of the royal quarters was jarring. Eurydice stood by a portable altar, her back to the entrance, her hands steady as she finalized the ritual preparations for the deceased king. She did not flinch as the lords burst in. She merely turned, her gaze icy and commanding, surveying the 2 men who had abandoned the procession to find sanctuary in her presence. Creon of Fairy and his scouts were already a blur of movement, abandoning the funeral march entirely. They didn't look back at the burning catafalque or the abandoned body of the king. They carved a path through the suffocating smoke, their horses straining as they scrambled upward, muscles bunching and trembling as they clawed for the relative safety of the ridge. The law of Xenia had burned away in the first breath of the fire. Now they were not guests, nor mourners, nor allies. They were fugitives of the mountain, racing to put the chaos of the Argead ruin behind them before the Illyrian steel caught their heels. Inside the tent, the royal family realized the trap instantly. Perdiccas staggered backward, his hand flying to the hilt of his ceremonial sword. The mountains. The truces mean nothing to them. We are pinned against the river. Eurydice stood rigid, her features calcified into an expression of raw, protective intensity. She did not panic. Her mind operated as a cold, furious tactical ledger. Philip stood beside her, his pupils contracting as he captured the roaring reflection of the ridge fires with an unblinking, predatory focus. As the roar of the panicked camp reached a crescendo, the side wall of the pavilion sheared open. Into the flickering orange shadow stumbled Lord Menes of Larissa, his face a mask of primal terror. He dragged his daughter, Felena, through the freezing wind. Felena stumbled into the tent and lunged forward, clinging to Eurydice's mantle for protection. Philip's gaze locked onto Felena's. He saw the potential future bride of his house, the woman who would one day become his first wife, now reduced to a fugitive. "Felena, are you okay?" "I'm fine, but the fire is everywhere," she gasped. "They are sealing the baggage train, Queen," Menes shrieked. "Ptolemy's guards are sorting the litters by lineage. They aren't saving us, they are turning us into collateral." Eurino, standing with a sudden, sharp clarity, stepped forward. "If they are sorting by bloodline, the main trail is a death trap. We move through the horse lines toward the irrigation sluice. They expect royal blood to flee in comfort, not in the muck of the ditches." Eurydice grabbed the girls, pulling the group into a tight circle with her sons. She turned to Perdiccas, her voice fierce. "Guard your sister, Felena, and the Menes family with your life. The Thessalian alliance is our future." They turned toward the exit, but the flap was ripped open. Ptolemy stood there. His armor was streaked with soot, his eyes wild with a frantic, desperate urgency. He had intended to issue an ultimatum to lock them in his protective cages, but the wildfire on the ridges had shattered his plans. He stared at the royals, his hands shaking. "We are under attack. The perimeter is collapsing," Ptolemy roared, his voice cracking. He saw they were already preparing to move, his original plan of a calculated escort obliterated. "Eurydice, Perdiccas, Philip, get out, run for the northern ridge. My guards are waiting to take you to the high ground. Go." Perdiccas stepped forward, his hand on his sword. "You seek to separate us from the funeral march, Regent. I seek to keep the Argead bloodline breathing." Ptolemy shoved his massive frame aside to clear the path. "If you stay in this valley, you will die in the mud. Go!" Philip stood in the mouth of the tent, his mind struggling to process the complexity of the man before him. "And Gigia? My half-brothers? What of them?" Ptolemy spun, his desperation absolute. "I've sent a guard for them. They are being taken to the same rally point on the hill. Don't do anything reckless. Stay with your mother, stay with your brother, and run." Ptolemy vanished into the swirling, acrid veil of smoke, his desperate, jagged cries for evacuation swallowed by the thunderous roar of the advancing Illyrian fire. Philip stood anchored to the spot for a heartbeat, his young frame rigid. He was caught in a fractured reality. The Regent's frantic, gravelly plea for unity warring with a chilling, instinctual clarity. In this suffocating darkness, he could no longer discern the line between a savior and the inevitable blade in the back. The trust he had held for the architects of his father's court dissolved into ash. The group surged into the night, their boots tearing through the cooling, gritty residue of the horse lines. Ptolemy's hand picked security detail, men whose faces were masks of iron discipline, now eroded by the primal, raw instinct of survival, pushed the royal party toward the jagged spine of the northern ridge. Behind them, the darkness began to pulse all with a secondary, chaotic rhythm. Emerging from the choking smoke like specters carved from the night, Queen Gigia appeared, flanked by her own panicked retinue. She was breathless, her regal cloak shredded by low-hanging pine branches, her 3 young sons, Archelaus, Argead, and Menelaus, scrambling desperately at her heels, their faces masked in soot and terror. "Hurry, Queen Aegae! We are almost at the crest," a guard bellowed, his voice straining against the inferno's roar. Aegae stumbled, her gaze snagging on the horizon. She stopped, paralyzed by the sheer apocalyptic scale of the horror. A massive, pulsating dance of orange flame was devouring the valley floor, transforming the night into a blistering furnace. "Oh, by the gods," she gasped, the heat flushing her skin to a feverish red. She grabbed the nearest guard's forearm, her fingers digging in with frantic strength. "Do you know if Queen Eurydice has escaped?" "Tell me." "I'm sure they have." The guard roared, shoving her forward as a rain of glowing embers fell from the canopy like falling stars. "Think only of your safety now. Move." At the crest of the hill, the 2 groups collided in the flickering, erratic light. Aegae's 3 sons broke into a desperate sprint, their small faces illuminated by the jagged, hungry glare of the ridge fires. As they crested the rise, they caught sight of the figures silhouetted against the dark slope ahead. "Mother! Look!" Archelaus cried, his voice cracking as he pointed with a trembling finger. "They are all here. Queen Eurydice, Perdiccas, Philip, and Eurino. They're all there. Come, hurry!" Argead rushed up the final incline, skidding to a halt as he turned to see the valley below consumed by the relentless, fiery tide. Beside him, young Menelaus, lungs burning and legs failing him, collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The 2 families converged, the terrifying geometry of the valley fire forcing them into an uneasy, desperate union. In the chaos of the highland slopes, the Argead house, long fractured by blood, rivalry, and hidden ambition, stood huddled in the dark, watching their world burn into a landscape of ruin. Aegae ran toward her rival, her eyes wet with relief and shock. "Eurydice! Oh, thank the gods, all of you escaped." Eurydice did not soften, but she reached out, a fleeting acknowledgement of their shared survival. "We are intact, Aegae. And your boys are safe." Eurino, clutching her bruised, soot-stained feet, stared down at the carnage. Her voice was thin, haunted. "Who did this?" "The funeral rites. They were supposed to be sanctioned for 3 days." Eurydice's face hardened, her expression a terrifying blend of cold anger and lingering terror. "Bartolus. It bears the mark of his shadow." The Aminted family stood united on the precipice, overlooking the burning horizon of Aegae, where the sky had bled into a violent, bruised red-orange. Perdiccas clutched the hilt of his sword, his voice tight with tremor. "Will they come for us now?" "With their swords and cavalry." "Are they hunting us?" Philip stood still, his slate-gray eyes devoid of his brother's panic, scanning the movement of the flames. "I do not think the full battle has begun yet." Argead looked up, wide-eyed. "Then is this just a warning? To signal the start of a war?" Philip turned to him, his voice low and devoid of childhood wonder. "If they wanted a slaughter, the war would have ended in the tents while we slept. If they wanted a tactical death, they had every chance to gut us before the panic took hold. This is not a battle, Argead, this is a cage. And we are the only ones left who realize the door has already been locked." When the sky split open, the proskopoi near the riverbank did not scatter. While the Macedonian camp dissolved into chaos, the embedded Theban guards reacted with clinical discipline, weaponizing the sudden light. The 3 motionless figures wrapped in dirt-colored, felt cloaks slid beneath the freezing surface of the Haliacmon River reeds, using the absolute panic of the camp's awakening to finalize their geostrategic audit. By the orange glare of Bartolus's beacons, they mapped the exact panic bottlenecks of the river loop, logged which mercenary units abandoned their spears, and verified that Ptolemy's left flank had frayed into a defenseless void. Down in the gray river mist, the second-in-command, Ismenias, quietly drew his short sword, Siphus, his focus anchored to the path of the Queen Mother's courier. "The old barbarian king has just built our containment for us," Ismenias murmured into the pitch-black reeds, his voice a flat frequency swallowed by the wind. "He has paralyzed the lowland corps. The Macedonians won't see our heavy shields locking the southern crossroads tomorrow until our spear points are already pressing through their canvas panels." High in the western passes, where the thin alpine air smelled of cold slate and crushed pine, General Parmenion pulled his wire-muscled mountain mare, to a violent halt beneath a jagged granite overhang, his unblinking eyes tracking the roaring line of bonfires. Not a localized raid, Parmenian's inner mind calculated with detached geometric precision. This is a multi-front psychological encirclement. The old wolf is paralyzing the entire lowland corps before he even deploys his heavy shields. The tactical metrics had shifted entirely, and his own timeline had been cut into fractions of an hour. The artificial rock slides he had ordered his mobile cells to trigger were no longer a controlled containment. They had become a desperate, suffocating race against time. "Cut the hemp ropes!" a vanguard commander roared somewhere up the ridge. "Cut them now!" With a deafening roar, the massive stacks of oak logs and winter granite sheared away from the upper shelves, plunging into the narrow throat of the gorge below. But the tactical victory was instantly poisoned. As the rock slides choked the main path to force Bardalis' heavy shields into the western marsh, an immense cloud of pulverized white dust exploded upward, combining with the thick, greasy black smoke drifting up from the peripheral border villages that Bardalis' light horsemen were already torching along the valley floor. The intersection was catastrophic. The western passes dissolved into a blind, suffocating labyrinth of absolute darkness and ash. The moonlight was completely strangled. Parmenian's 80 unvouched spears, shattered across the crumbling ledgers of the high cliffs, were left entirely blind. To survive the midnight hours, Parmenian's veterans were forced to abandon the geometry of the line and hunt by ear alone. Listening through the roaring wind and the distant screams of the burning valleys for the microscopic scrape of a foreign sandal, or the oiled click of an Illyrian Sika blade clearing its sheath in the dark. Parmenian gripped his reins, his mare shifting nervously. If his 80 spears could not hold the teeth of this mountain bottleneck in the dark, there would be no kingdom left to defend by morning. Beneath the low-hanging blanket of alpine fog, these hand-picked line hoplites, sent by Pelopidas as a specific advance unit to accompany the funeral march, stood in dead, stone-like silence. There were no campfires. The only sound was the low, rhythmic rasp of oiled pumice stones, scraping against the raw iron of their short swords, ziphus, and the heavy, synchronized breathing of soldiers, long accustomed to the brutal spacing of the shield wall. From the dark sanctuary of his family's canvas, 14-year-old Philip had already tracked the position of this hidden foreign presence. Through a narrow slit in the heavy linen tent flap, his eyes had mapped the 3 cold, dark hearths near the reeds, revealed now not as abandoned campsites, but as Ismenias's precise tactical staging markers. Hidden safely within the fierce, protective circle of his mother and siblings, the young prince watched the shadows, logging their layout with a statuesque detachment. "Check the greave straps," Ismenias murmured into the dark, his voice a flat, unyielding frequency that stayed below the rushing noise of the current. "Double knot the leather. The road through the southern crossroads tomorrow is caked in limestone slurry. If a shield-bearer trips on the ascent, the density of the wing fractures." The moment King Bardalis' ridge fires erupted across the northern peaks, the Macedonian camp woke into a screaming, liquor-sodden frenzy. But Ismenias's men did not scatter. They used the light of the barbarian beacons to execute a precise procedural audit of the encampment's collapse. By the orange glare of the hills, Ismenias tracked the layout of Ptolemy's 1,200 mercenaries as they scrambled to buckle their armor, logged their panic bottlenecks, and verified that the Regent's left flank had frayed into a defenseless void. From within his family's perimeter, Philip silently calculated the same collapsing landscape, matching the logic of the men in the reeds. Ismenias stood motionless in the mud, his knuckles steady on his muffled shield straps, watching the camp burn with the detached observation of an architect checking a buckled foundation. "The Aloros beast has running room until the dawn," Ismenias muttered to his third commander, his hand dropping to the pommel of his short sword. "He's staring at the sky, waiting for an Illyrian firestorm. He won't see our heavy shields locking the southern crossroads tomorrow until our spear points are already pressing through their canvas panels." Directly above the valley floor, Dirtus, Lord of Lyncestus, was playing a masterclass in calculating treason, maintaining an unreadable, weaponized neutrality from his fortified alpine encampment. While the lowland levies and Chalcidian mercenaries were frantically buckling their armor beneath the orange glow of the ridge fires, Dirtus's 300 elite heavy cavalrymen sat on their mounts in absolute darkness along the secondary limestone trails. hidden in the blind spots between Bartolus' massive infantry squares and Parmenions' blind gorges. With slung lances and muffled iron bits, Dirtis acted as the geographical gatekeeper. If Ptolemy's couriers tried to escape through his territory toward the western strongholds, his riders intercepted them in the dark, slit their throats, and seized their ledger chests without a single torch being lit. Dirtis stood beside his wire-muscled charger, tracking the shifting metrics below with the unblinking eyes of a hawk. Let the Aloros beast barter away his Pierian timber to the south, Dirtis calculated silently. The fools in Pella think a crown can be held by credit lines with Athens. If Bartolus fractures the vanguard tomorrow at the gates of Aegae, I will let the mountain flood drown Ptolemy, lock the high gates, and claim the kingdom's core for my own lineage. Dirtis had spent the post-midnight hours entertaining agents from both sides. Just 2 hours before dawn, he dismissed an envoy from Ptolemy, who had promised a permanent exemption from the salt house taxes if the Lyncestian cavalry shored up the regent's left flank. Dirtis took the gold weight token, spat in the dirt, and let the envoy return through the smoke blind. Concurrently, his personal scouts had already established a secret line of communication with the Dardanian vanguard commander Grabus, offering the old barbarian king a clear, unmonitored path through the secondary gorges of Upper Macedonia, guaranteeing that his heavy shield infantry squares could descend onto the valley floor completely unmolested by Parmenian cells, provided Bartolus recognized Lyncestis as an independent sovereign principle once Pella falls. To the east, across the dark, marshy coastal plains of Mygdonia, Pausanias the Pretender weaponized the midnight vacuum with aggressive, predatory precision. Astride his gray stallion amidst the thick scent of stagnant brine and rotting reeds, he tracked the low-slung silhouettes of his vanguard as they swept through the salt flats. Knowing that the regent's frantic silver bribes were hopelessly gridlocked in the rugged mountain passes to the west, Pausanias spent the hours after midnight launching a lightning assault against Pella's isolated eastern frontier posts. His gold-incentivized Chalcidian mercenaries did not honor the sacred funeral truce of the Ichphora. They rode hard and soundless through the coastal mist, their iron-shod hooves muffled with leather wraps. They did not issue ultimatums. They simply rode down the unmonitored border garrisons in the dark, slitting the throats of sleeping sentries in the dead silence of their barracks, before the local commanders could even verify the rumors of Alexander II's death. A mercenary captain, his face smeared with grease and the black soot of a captured watchtower, pulled his mount alongside the pretender. "The lower redoubt has fallen, my lord," the man whispered, his breath pluming in the damp air. "We took the watch commander before he could reach the beacon fire. The men are already tearing down the standard of Pella." "And the town magistrates?" Pausanias asked, his voice a low, freezing friction. "They saw the gold weight on our banners and the blood on our spears, my lord. They opened the granaries without a single stone thrown." A cold, predatory amusement flared in Pausanias' eyes as he watched his mercenaries hoist his own crimson crest over the captured ramparts. "Ptolemy thinks custom buys him a 3-day shield," he reasoned coldly, his geostrategic gaze shifting toward the western horizon, where the trade roads cut cleanly back toward the administrative heartland. "But a sacred custom doesn't lock a city gate when the guards are starving. Pella is a hollow shell, waiting for a true sovereign to crack it open." By 3 hours after midnight, Pausanias had systematically absorbed 2 critical coastal settlements, securing the strategic junctions along the eastern maritime corridors. He had transformed the temporary leadership vacuum into a devastating geostrategic decapitation, positioning his formidable mercenary vanguard just a 2 days' rapid march from the capital's completely unprotected eastern gates. He lay coiled like an armed viper on Pella's exposed flank, waiting for the precise moment to strike the final, lethal blow, while the legitimate bloodline remained frozen in the dirt of the funeral crawl. To be continued in episode 14-2. River of Shadows Part 2. Watch and listen now. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias Playlist. Bookmark Volume 1, Divine Oracle Playlist. Join the Vanguard. A new episode drops every single day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 5 to 15-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below. The dynamic has shattered across the field, with Felina and her sons joining the immediate breakout from the camp under the fire blind, the royal lineage is scattering right as Ismenias locks down the crossroads. If you were advising the young King Perdiccas III at this precise crossroad checkpoint, would you try to shatter Ismenias' lines with raw lowland iron? Or rely on old General Italus to keep the ancestral bastion locked tight until the pyre is lit? Drop your tactical theories below.